Let's press on. There are 99 holy names that are subsumed under the name Allah. And in one tradition, there's 100 holy names, and only, I think something like only the camel knows what the 100th name is. But among the most popular of these names are the compassionate, the merciful, the king, and the holy. Others include the strong, the almighty, the majestic, the creator, and the all-knowing. I think it's interesting because they have these names and they talk a little bit about the characteristics of Allah, but essentially I think in Islam, Allah is a knower. You can't know much about Allah because Allah is transcendent, and none of the incarnational language, the anthropomorphic language that you might find in the Bible. It's much different than that. The Quran tells us that Adam, the first human, was called into life by God as the highest and most beautiful creation. This happened despite jealous opposition among the jinn, angel-like beings. Humans were destined to be representatives, caliph of God on earth. When your Lord said to the angels, "I am placing on the earth one that shall rule as my deputy," they replied, "Will you put there one that will do evil and shed blood? When we have for so long sung your praises and sanctified your name?" He said, "I know what you know not." He taught Adam the names of all things and then set them before the angels, saying, "Tell me the names of these if what you say be true." "Glory be to you," they replied. "We have no knowledge except that which you have given us. You alone are all-knowing and wise." And he said, "Adam, tell me their names." And when Adam had named them, he said, "Did I not tell you that I know the secrets of the heavens and the earth, and know that all that you reveal and all that you conceal?" And when we said to the angels, "Prostrate yourselves before Adam," they all prostrated themselves except Satan, who in his pride refused and became an unbeliever. We said, "Adam, dwell with your wife in paradise and eat of its fruits to your heart's content, wherever you will. But never approach this tree, or you shall both become transgressors." But Satan lured them thence and brought about their banishment. So, who was asking about Satan last week? Yeah. So that gives you a little picture of that, doesn't it? After the fall, the first humans were banned from the garden. Since they showed remorse, God looked upon them with mercy and chose to give them guidance through the prophets. Of course, what happens in the Quran after they leave, they still have to leave the garden, which I think some people, it raises questions for people. If God forgave them on the spot, why did they have to leave the garden? And I don't think there's been a real good answer that I've seen on that. But they are banished from the garden, and where do they go? Say that again? They end up in Mecca, at least at first. They end up in Mecca. And Adam ends up in Mecca, and that Kaaba, the big black house of God, is either constructed at that time, at least that's one of the prevailing traditions, that Adam is the first one to build that. Of course, in the Bible, what happens? The Bible's different. What happens in the Bible? They get kicked out of the garden too. What happens? You know this story.
They become workers and slaves. And
yeah, they have to work hard. Yeah.
They're sinful.
And they're sinful. Pain in childbirth. Right? And even eventually death. But they don't die right away, even though that was part of the promise that they would die if they eat from that fruit of the tree. So death comes. The Quran really knows nothing about a continuing separation between God and humanity, or of a profound guilt on the part of human beings or original sin. The human maintains dignity as God's representative on earth. So right away, different picture, isn't it? Biblical story is much different, where you get this picture of separation. And eventually that separation comes to the story of Jesus, and we talk about the cross being the bridge for that separation. The at-one-ment, the atonement that we get through the cross, where that separation is bridged in Jesus.
Did they talk about Eve at all in that?
I don't know a lot about that. I think Eve, if I remember right, in my readings, maybe doesn't show up till a little later. I think he might even meet Adam could be making this up, in Mecca. I don't somebody, then you can't blame her, can you? So, you know, I think I've read someplace that she might have met Adam in Mecca, but I could be wrong on that. Do some research and look it up. I'm saying that to me.
I don't dare ask them.
Question.
Yes?
In the top of the page, does that follow the first humans?
Yeah, I don't know. This is my typewriter at work, so I wouldn't put too much into it. I'm not as precise as the biblical text or the Koran, I can tell you that. So, good question. Now you got me thinking, but I don't know the answer to that. For Islam, Allah is referred to as master, not as father. That makes sense. I mean, you wouldn't call God father in that kind of language. But it does, I think it's an implication of how they respond then in faith. Allah requires obedience and not necessarily a personal relationship. Islam, and I think Meredith, this was part of your question, Islam in Arabic means submission to the will of Allah. Muslim is a related word that can be roughly translated as one who submits to Allah and His will. So very related words, very much at the center of what they do. They submit to the laws that have been passed down, the teaching of the prophets that have been given to them. Abraham plays an especially important role in the Quran. He is honored as a friend of God, as a model of faith, and as a prophet of the one true God. Of course, as we mentioned before, in the Quran, Abraham is spending much of his time around Mecca. In the Bible, he's going to the promised land, Canaan, and settling near Hebron. At first, Abraham believes the stars and moons to be gods, but then comes to see that they are not. When night drew its shadow over him, he saw a star. That, he said, is surely my God. But when it faded in the morning light, he said, I will not worship gods that fade. When he beheld the rising moon, he said, that is my God. But when it set, he said, if my Lord does not guide me, I shall surely go astray. Then, when he beheld the sun shining, he said, that must be my God, it is the largest. But when it is set, he said to the people, I disown your idols. I will turn my face to him who has created the heavens and the earth, and I will live a righteous life. I am no idolater. Which is a very interesting story, isn't it? Talking about the revelation that Abraham was experiencing. Now, it probably had a lot to do, it's probably anachronistic, because it probably had a lot to do with what was going on in Mecca at the time of Muhammad, and all the different idols that were worshipped in that Kaaba. And certainly a shrine of idolatry, and one that eventually Muhammad cleansed, but not without a struggle. So I think we have some anachronistic tendencies going on there as they relate that day and that time and those proclivities back to Abraham. The story...
Wouldn't that story make it be Abraham's first day on earth?
Say more about that.
Well, it has to be his first day on earth if he decided these things and then they fade. We've seen this many times, unless it's his first day on earth.
Well, I don't know if a baby Abraham is experiencing these things. I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
But I'm saying is that as he's saying these things,
right.
His first day, his eyes were open then.
Yeah. I think that would be taking a story, a faith story, probably further than we know where to take it, because sometime along the way, Abraham had some sort of revelation where he was having this conversation with God, and he came to see eventually that no, these things are just part of the created world, and I'm not going to be an idolater. So I think it's a snapshot of history, and that would be taking it more literally than it's intended.
Kind of like our story of Adam and Eve.
Maybe,
when
yeah.
their eyes were open, the fish don't know he's wet.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, something like that.
The person that the Christian and the Jews and the Muslims all can unite. They all recognize Abraham.
Yes, they do. They all the traditions look back at Abraham as some sort of father, some sort of progenitor. Okay? The story of the sacrifice, we've mentioned this before, of Abraham's son is found in Surah 37, but the son is not named. Most Muslim interpreters assume that Abraham's son Ishmael was the one to be sacrificed. So obviously a different tradition there. Now it's interesting, we'll read this in a minute, but immediately after this passage in the Quran, it talks about Isaac, but not about Ishmael. But when they read this, and it sounds like it's just pronouns here, they understand this as Ishmael. They replied, "Build up a pyre and cast him into the blazing flames." Thus did they scheme against him. I don't know who the "they" is. Maybe fallen angels, I'm not sure. But we, and I think that's the royal we that you see a lot in the Quran, we base them all. Or maybe it's Allah and angelic helpers. I'm not sure. That we shows up in the Bible too, doesn't it? Let us make them in our image. He said, "I will take a refuge with my Lord. He will give me guidance. Lord, grant me a righteous son." We gave him news of his younger son. And when he reached the age when he could work with him, his father said to him, "My son, I have dreamt that I was sacrificing you. Tell me what you think." He replied, "Father, do as you are bidden. God willing, and you shall find me steadfast." Now, doesn't that just paint a picture of Islam? It's all about submission. It's all about obedience. You don't even find some of that undercurrent of passion, love, loss that you see in the Bible, I think. But when they had submitted to God, and Abraham had laid down his son prostrate upon his face, we called out to him, saying, "Abraham, you have fulfilled your vision. Thus do we reward the righteous." That was indeed a bitter test. We ransomed his son with a noble sacrifice, and bestowed on him the praise of later generations. Peace be upon Abraham. Thus do we reward the righteous. He was one of our believing servants. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting when you read things from a different perspective. Now, I have some things in here that I'm sure my Muslim friend tonight is not going to like, because we pick things from a different perspective and we put a different slant on them, and they sound radically different. But, you know, I think it's important that we at least compare ourselves in some of the sharper edges over against Christianity and Islam along the way. And, you know, in their tradition, this is Ishmael. And this is the story that gets passed down through the Arabs. This is true Islam, as they would understand it. Other stories from the Bible include Moses as a man who talks with God, the conflicts between Moses and Pharaoh, and the escapes of the Israelites through the Red Sea. We're going to look at some other ones too in a second, and you can begin to see some of the more specific changes that happen. A passage similar to the Ten Commandments is found in Surah 17. The Lord gives abundantly to whom he will, and sparingly to whom he pleases. He knows and observes his servants. You shall not kill your children for fear of want. We will provide for them and for you. To kill them is a grievous sin. You shall not commit adultery, for it is lewd and evil. You shall not kill any man whom God has bidden you to kill, except for a just cause. We could probably spend quite a bit of time talking about that one, couldn't we? And we will next week. We'll talk about that much more specifically. If a man is slain unjustly, his heirs shall be entitled to satisfaction. But let him not carry his vengeance to excess, for his victim is sure to be assisted and avenged. Do not approach the property of orphans, except with the best of motives, until they reach maturity. Keep your promises, for you are accountable for all that you promise. Give full measure when you measure and weigh with even scales. That is better and fairer in the end. So you get laws that sound a little like the Ten Commandments, don't you? And that's not uncommon. You get that in lots of different traditions around the world, lots of different religions around the world. Things that sound like the Ten Commandments.
But nothing about loving your enemies.
Nothing about loving your enemy. No, I don't think you'll find that in the Quran. Not that much about love in general in the Quran. It's just not there.